Apparently, this young millennial generation is unleadable, and they frustrate everyone. They're accused of being entitled and narcissistic, and some have even accused them of being lazy. I think it's an unfair label. And I think the first thing we do as great leaders is we're supposed to demonstrate empathy. And I think we've failed the millennial generation, which is we haven't demonstrated empathy, but rather have just accused them and expressed our frustrations. The funny thing is, so many leaders are so frustrated by this generation that they've given up trying to lead them and now just ask them what they want. And they say bean bags and free food and flexible work hours and open work plans. And we give them all of that and still nothing changes. So I've been able to sort of boil it down to 4 observations: parenting, technology, impatience, and environment. Many amongst this generation, and the millennials are defined as a group of people born around the year 1984 and add another 20 years. So many in this generation have been subject to what has been described as a failed parenting strategy. Many of them were raised being told that they were special and that they can have whatever they want just because they want it. Many of them got into advanced classes in schools not because they necessarily deserved it, but because their parents complained. And then may have even gotten better grades, not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. And then they graduate, and they get a job, and instantly they discover they're not special. And instantly they discover that you can't have whatever you want just because you want it. You get nothing for coming in last, and your parents can't help you get a promotion. I've even heard stories of parents complaining that their kids didn't get a promotion. I've heard stories of parents filling out job applications. But in an instant, many in this generation have their entire self-image completely shattered immediately. And what that results in is it shakes their self-confidence. And so you have a disproportionately high number of people of an entire generation growing up with lower self-esteem, lower self-confidence than previous generations. And remember also, they've grown up in an Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook world where they're exceptionally good at filtering, presenting themselves as they want to be seen, curating their lives even. In other words, they're very good at displaying how they want to be seen. So they sound tough, and they sound confident, and they say things like, "Ask us, we know," where the reality is they don't know, they're incredibly uncertain, they're incredibly unsure, and they don't want anybody to know. Now, we know when we engage with cell phones or with social media, we get a hit of a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is the same chemical that makes us feel good when we find the thing we're looking for, or when you hit the goal, yes, or win the game, did it, right? That chemical is released when our phones go bing, buzz, flash, or beep. It's why when we're feeling a little bit down or feeling a little bit sorry for ourselves, we send out 10 texts to 10 friends. Hi, 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 hoping to get a response because it actually makes us feel good. Now, dopamine is the same chemical released in alcohol, nicotine, and gambling. And almost all addictions are dopamine-based addictions. Now, we have age restrictions on alcohol, cigarettes, and gambling because we know that a young developing mind is not yet strong enough to deal with the addictive qualities of dopamine. So we restrict children from engaging in these things. But we have no such age restrictions on social media or mobile phones. This is very dangerous. When we're very, very young, the only approval we need is the approval of our parents. That's all we need, right? And as we go through adolescence, we start to make this transition where we now crave the approval of our peers. Very frustrating for our parents, very important for us. It allows us to acculturate outside of our immediate families into the wider tribe, right? It's a time of high anxiety and high stress, and we're supposed to learn to rely on our friends. Some people, quite by accident, discover alcohol and the numbing effects of dopamine that helps them cope with the stress of adolescence. That connection becomes hardwired. And so for the rest of their lives, when they suffer any kind of extreme stress, social stress, career stress, they won't turn to a person, they'll turn to the bottle. Now, as I said before, social media and mobile phones also release dopamine, and we have no age restrictions on this open access. It's the equivalent of throwing open the liquor cabinet and telling our teenagers, try the vodka to help you get through your teenage years. And that's what's happening. Unfettered access to a highly, highly addictive device. right? And like all addiction, in time, waste resources, and destroy relationships. In other words, there's an entire generation not only growing up with an addiction, but growing up with a lack of coping mechanisms. They haven't learned and aren't learning the social interactions that we need to learn to deal with stress in our later life. So what happens later on in their lives when they suffer stress, they're not turning to each other, they're not turning to people, they're turning to devices and they're turning to social media. And for some, their entire self-worth comes from how many followers they have, how many likes they get. It can be devastating if somebody unfollows them, right? And any kind of work stress, they're not going to people. I've talked to lots and lots and lots of millennials, and they will admit to me that they struggle to form deep, meaningful relationships. They will freely admit that they wouldn't be surprised if their friends canceled on them because they got better plans somewhere else. And when that happens, there's no sense of how to deal with that stress. And so you have an insecure generation that doesn't have the coping mechanisms how to deal with the stress. We're starting to see increase in suicide rates. We're starting to see increase in drug addiction and depression, even mass homicide. In the United States, with over 120 school shootings in the past decade, something like 70% of them were perpetrated by kids born after the year 1980.